TIMA6211 PoE Activity 2. Let's look at our instructions as per the PoE document. So the title for Activity 2 is Pedagogical Learning. Your context: you are a grade 5 mathematics teacher. You have taught a series of lessons on certain topics in patterns, functions, and algebra to your learners throughout the year. You have decided that you are going to assess their progress by giving them an assignment to do instead of a standardized test. So first of all, we need to focus on what is the difference between a test and an assignment. So let's refer to the CAPS document for clarity. Just a note, memorandum for an assignment as well. All right, so that is also a requirement. You need a memorandum for an assignment. What is the difference between a test and assignment according to our CAPS document? Tests and examinations are individualized assessment tasks and should be carefully designed to ensure that learners demonstrate their full potential in the math content. The question should be carefully spread to cater for different cognitive levels of learners. Tests and examinations are predominantly assessed using a memorandum. An assignment, as is the case with tests and examinations, is mainly an individualized task. It can be a collection of past questions, but should focus on the more demanding work, as any resource material can be used, which is not the case in a task that is done in class under supervision. So remember, as with a test, you need a memorandum. It's an individualized task, but they may use resources. So your instructions for this activity. First of all, our activity for activity 2 is divided into 2 parts. So the first part is to develop an assessment assignment out of 25 marks for grade 5 learners. The assessment assignment is now an assignment where they may use resources, and it's going to form part of their marks for the summative assessment. The theme of your activity should match the theme of the poster you made for your classroom. In other words, it needs to be set around a social or cultural issue. Develop the activity on a worksheet that will enable learners to consolidate their learning. Remember that this is an assessment of learning and no new content may be taught. So assessment of learning is your summative assessment. So this assignment will form part of that mark. Your assessment only needs to cover the same content that you planned covered with your poster that you created. But it isn't that you only need to use that. You can use more than the content, but you may not teach new content. Remember that you need to cover a range of cognitive levels in your assessment. Avoid just plain regurgitation of content. So we may not just only ask a recap of knowledge. We also need to focus on more complex calculations and problem-solving questions. Right, so this is your first part. And also include a memo and mark allocation. Remember that you cannot award more than 1 mark for an answer if it does not involve a complex thinking process that deserves more than 1 mark. Right, so that is the first part. Up to number 6 is the first part. An assignment, which is going to be used as an assessment of learning, together with a memo. A very important note on a memo is that a memorandum must be a copy of the same worksheet, but must have the answers with ticks indicating the mark allocation. In other words, when you are a teacher one day, you will set up a test and you will give the test for moderation to your grade head or head of department of mathematics. and that person needs to go through the test to see that everything is okay, and to give a memorandum to your department head or for yourself. You don't want to have two different sets of papers. You want your question with your answer underneath it. So just as you need to set up a worksheet with space for the answer, you will provide your memorandum in that space. In other words, the answers in the space that you have provided for your learners in red with all the ticks indicating the marks. And then next to the question on the right-hand side, you will indicate the total of marks for that particular question. Very important for this activity is cognitive levels. In other words, cognitive levels means that we have to cater for all the ability groups or ability levels in our classroom. So we have to focus on easy questions as well as more difficult questions. So I will go through the cognitive levels with you just now. All right, so just remember that you have to have all of those cognitive levels in your assignment. Then the second part of this activity 2 is a written description with the following information. So a Word document with the following information. The exact objectives that you are assessing. In other words, what knowledge or skills do you expect your learners to acquire? Like you do with lesson objectives, you go to your CAPS curriculum and you see what you have focused on during your poster, your ISTARS activity 2, and you can add a few objectives to that. But in the end, your objectives and your questions should match. I'm going to check that all the objectives that you have listed in this written document are indeed covered by the questions in your assignment. Then you need to indicate where and how the different cognitive levels have been covered and assessed. This means that you have to break down the questions and tell me which level was used at each question. And I will help you with that just now, how to indicate that. Then the third part of this written description is where you have to show how you allocated the 25 marks to accommodate a balance between easy and more challenging questions, and therefore supporting the various learning abilities within your class. And for this, you need to show how you worked out how many marks should be allocated for each cognitive level. Right, so let's just look at the activity 2 and the two components. The first component is the assignment worksheet and the memo. You may include pictures in your worksheet. For instance, you can take a snippet of your poster, your digital poster that you created for ISTARS 2 and put it in your assignment. Or you may refer them to a short paragraph with information because you may use resources and just in-text reference there where they should get the answers from or where you base your questions on. But do not let the pictures interfere with the workspace. All right, so make it interesting but neat and let it have a logical flow. The content should be interesting. It must be attractive to the grade 5 learners. Be creative and design interesting questions that match the theme. And the theme is the social or cultural issue that you used in your ISTARS 2. Arrange your questions in a logical order. Give clear instructions and enough space for the learners to answer. So remember, then for the memo, to provide the answer in red with ticks where you allocate the marks. and then a total for each question. Cover a range of cognitive abilities, and I will talk about the cognitive levels just now. The question should be clear and provide obvious flow in conceptual progression from easy to more challenging. So you will start with an easy question and you will then progress to the more difficult questions at the end. Provide a clear and detailed memo and mark allocation. Right, so that is the first part of this activity. Then the second part is your written component. So here you give a description of the assessment assignment. First of all, you list the objectives. You write clear, measurable lesson objectives, or not really lesson objectives, assignment objectives. So include a measurable verb in every objective, just like you do with a lesson plan. Then the cognitive levels. Identify the cognitive levels with sound reasoning. For instance, you're going to tell me question 1 is a knowledge level question because, and then you have to give me a reason why you say it is a knowledge level question. And then the same you do for every question, and make sure that you then cover all the cognitive levels. Make an effort to ensure that the worksheet is accessible by learners with varying levels of ability. So if you make sure that you cover all the cognitive levels, you will be you will make sure that it is accessible by learners with varying levels of ability. The content of the worksheet includes multiple levels of cognitive thinking. So also consult the Bloom's taxonomy. The description of the mark allocation. You have to give me a description of how the 25 marks were allocated to accommodate a balance between easy and more challenging questions and therefore supporting the various learning abilities within your class. Ensure that the mark allocation is in line with the required level of thinking and application. So I will break down this for you in the following slide. On page 296 of our Math Cups document, we have requirements of the cognitive levels for each and every test, assignment, or examination in mathematics. You need to make sure that 25% of the questions or of the marks are knowledge level questions, which is your easier questions. It is a straight recall or identification and direct use of the correct formula, or the use of math facts, or the appropriate use of math vocabulary. Like, for instance, when you need to write down the next 3 numbers in this sequence. This is a very easy one. So this would be a knowledge level question for 1 mark. So if you have just a recall of a fact, you only award 1 mark to that question. You will not award 3 marks for an answer of yes or no. All right, so only 1 mark for a recall of straight facts. Then the next level is your routine procedures, like simple applications and calculations with more than 1 step. For an instance, in a number sentence where you have to work out a missing number. 45% of the marks should be for routine procedures. Then for complex procedures, 20%, and for problem solving, 10%. The difference between complex procedures and problem solving is mainly that complex procedures are problems with calculations of a higher order and which you have done in class, which they have seen. All right, you've done it in class, you've discussed it, and they can use the information within the word problem to calculate the answer. A problem-solving question is usually an unseen, non-routine problem where they have to use the highest order of thinking. All right, and something that you haven't done in class. to really challenge the learners, only 10% of the marks. So let's look at these cognitive levels in more detail and how you actually calculate how many marks should be allocated to each of these levels. Right, so I've just taken all of these cognitive levels, all 4 levels, and I have also included the percentage of each of these levels in this pie chart. So let's say, for an example, an assignment is out of 25 marks, which is indeed the case for this assessment assignment that you have to create. So now you need to work out how many marks should be used for each of these levels before you can start with your assignment. So let's say we start with our complex level questions just to work out how many marks should be awarded for the complex level. That is easy to work out. 20% of the 25 marks. So in this case, it will be 5 marks if you work it out, because our assignment is going to count out of 25 marks. If it's counting out of 30 marks, you just work out 20% of 30 marks. All right, so this is how you calculate each and every test and examination that you do in mathematics to ensure that you cover all the levels. Then for our problem solving level, it's 10% of the 25 marks. That is 10 divided by 100 multiplied by 25, and you get 2.5 marks. So now you can decide to either allocate 2 marks or 3 marks to the problem solving level questions. And this you can finalize once you have set up your assignment. You can tweak your questions there to let it count up to 25 marks. So you have to make sure in the end that all your decimals that you have rounded up or down total 25. So for knowledge level, you do the same calculation. 25% of 25 marks is 25 divided by 100 multiplied by 25 gives you 6.25 marks. So you decide on either 6 or 7 marks. And then you do the same with the routine level. You work it out. So in the end, you decide that maybe you're going to allocate 11 marks for routine, 5 for complex, 2 for problem, and 7 for knowledge, so that it totals 25 marks. Just make sure that when you add it up, it adds up to 25 marks. And this slide is actually the answer to number B or C, I can't remember, I think it's number 7C of your instructions. The written component where you have to show me how you allocated the marks to ensure that there is a spread of questions across the different levels. So now you know that you're going to start with a knowledge level question because that's my easier questions. So I will maybe start with question 1 and 2, knowledge level questions, and each of them will count 1 mark. And I will discuss in my written component that question 1 and question 2 are knowledge level questions because, and I will give a reason. Then I will continue with a routine level question for, say, 2 marks. And say question 3 is a routine level question. It counts 2 marks, and this is my reason why it's a routine level question. Then you can put in another knowledge level question. Then you can put in a complex level question. Then a routine level question again. And just make sure that you end off with a problem solving question at the end. So start with a knowledge level question, end off with your problem solving question, and have a mix of the other levels in the rest of your assignment. So this is actually part of your answer. Let's just look at our rubrics. Once again, the first part is your assignment worksheet and memo. The first criteria is for the creativity and neatness. If your worksheet is attractive and would make any grade 5 learner want to engage in the content, you will earn 5 marks. But if it's untidy and boring, there's no pictures, or the picture doesn't relate to the content that you are assessing, then you're not going to get good marks. All right, so layout. Make sure that the questions have been arranged in a logical order with clear instructions given and enough space to answer. Range of cognitive levels across the question. I'm going to check that you have indeed used both simple and challenging questions, that you have addressed all the different cognitive levels, and that you have been creative in designing interesting questions that match the theme, that you have indeed spent time on this assignment. Then memo and mark allocation. Make sure that you provide me a memo as a copy of the worksheet with the filled in answers underneath each questions in red with the ticks indicating the marks, and that every question's total marks is allocated on the right. So you will see that 20 marks out of the 50 is for your assignment, worksheets and memo. And the 30 marks out of 50 marks is for this written component, the second part. So please don't forget about this part. It's the most important part. Your objectives are written, a measurable verb is present in them. They are written from the perspective of the learner and are clear. And they match the questions in your assignment. Do not just write a list there and do something else in your assignment. It should match. The objectives should match the question's content. The description of how and where the different cognitive levels were covered. So in each question, you're going to tell me which cognitive levels was used, or which cognitive level was used and why. Cognitive levels have been accurately identified with sound reasoning. The student shows that a lot of time and effort went into ensuring that the worksheet was accessible by learners with varying levels of ability. So you need to write up for each and every question which level you have used or addressed and why. And then the mark allocation and weighting was actually my slide with a pie chart of the different levels and how you worked out how many marks should be allocated for each of the levels. So the content of the worksheet includes multiple levels of cognitive thinking. The mark allocation is in line with the required level of thinking and application. That means the required level, the cognitive levels, 45% for routine, 25% for knowledge, 10% for problem solving, and 20% for complex level. So that working out, this one is actually the answer to that last criteria. Right, I've heard a few beeps. Okay, so it was just load sheddings. All right, any questions on this activity?